Despite the out-of-conference losses, USC still in the running for a Pac-12 South Division championship and berth in the conference championship game. So big matchup with Arizona coming up at the Coliseum on Saturday. Got Matt Lowry on the line from Conquest Chronicles, SB Nation's platform for USC, to help us break it all down. Matt, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Still recovering from the Notre Dame loss, but like you said, USC still in the running for the Pac-12 South. Control their own destiny right now. They just have to make it through with some key wins throughout the season.
So, yeah, somebody was asking me the other day about USC and what it would take to get Clay Helton out the door, and they mentioned 7-5, and I said, you know what? This team could go 7-5 and win the Pac-12 championship. And they were like, how is that going to happen? I said, well, they've already lost 2 non-conference games. They could go 6-3 in the conference, as Utah did last year, and make it to the conference championship game, win the Pac-12 title game, and they're 8-5, and they've won the Pac-12. So we'll worry about that on down the line because, as you mentioned, it's all in front of them. But despite the losses, they won the key game against Utah. That's the big one right now. And with Arizona State still in play as the big game down the line, if USC continues to take care of business in the conference, then that's what we have in play. But before we get to Arizona and what could happen down the stretch in November, Matt, it was a 1-2 score game most of the time in South Bend. They gave themselves a shot with a late touchdown, 30-27 in the onside kick. Your thoughts about how USC performed against what's got to be one of the 10 best teams in the country?
Well, I don't think USC performed as bad as we thought. I think the frustrating thing with fans is that USC had 2 weeks to prepare, and still you could see there were still some issues that were a problem the first 5 games of the season. I felt USC relied on the run game a little bit. They made the late adjustment to the run game. You saw that with Marquise Stepp when he was in the game and he was getting carries. I think a lot of people were wondering why he didn't get any more carries, yet he was such a difference maker against the Irish. It took more than 2 defenders to bring down Stepp. With the defense, and something that we haven't seen at all this year was that USC got gashed in between the tackles. We know they had issues containing mobile quarterbacks and the misdirection run games to the outside. But in between the tackles, USC got gashed pretty good. Tony Jones Jr. rushed for 176 yards, and a lot of those rushes were up the middle. They were interior in between the tackle runs that we've seen USC thrive off of. And then you saw the critical drive where Ian Book went up the middle, I want to say almost through the heart of the USC defense, and converted a 3rd and long, and then did it again where he scored a touchdown late in the game. And those were key those were key defensive plays where if they would have got a stop, USC could have actually won the game or took a lead at least. But I felt USC improved. They showed a lot of fight. They showed a lot of heart. I just think from a coaching standpoint, the adjustments were made either too late or there were a lack of adjustments to certain plays that ended up hurting them.
So, Matt, as you mentioned, Marquise Stepp, prize recruit, gets into the game, makes his presence known. Probably the best game that he's had against a quality opponent, 10 carries for 82 yards. Stephen Card acquitted himself pretty well, 9 for 44. Veve Malapai, though, unfortunately, the leading rusher on the team, lost for the season. How do you anticipate that's going to affect the carries between the other two?
Well, I think for Stepp, this is where you're going to see him get a lot of carries because Malapai was the guy who was doing a lot of the physical running. But with Stepp, now this forces USC's hand to play him and to get him more carries. Of course, Stephen Carr is going to get his carries, and you might see Keenan Christian. You might see him, who's a true freshman. You might see him get some carries because of for depth reasons. Maybe Dominic Davis. the former cornerback slash current wide receiver or whatever position he is. Maybe he goes back to running back and he gets some carries for depth reasons. They're gonna try, they're gonna throw in a third guy in there to get some carries. But right now, I think a bulk of the carries are gonna go to Step and Carr. If anything, I think if Harold's wise, maybe Marquise Step gets the start against Arizona.
So, of course, USC's biggest win of the season was against Utah, and one of the main reasons why they pulled that game out was Matt Fink steps in, and really the wide receivers. I don't know when the last time I saw a wide receiver core win a game, not single-handedly, of course, but that had that much of an impact in just winning every 50-50 ball, just abusing a defensive secondary that's one of the best in the Pac-12, and that would appear to be USC's formula for getting past Arizona. You got Keaton Slovis. He's entrenched as the starter, coming off a nice little 24 for 35 day against Notre Dame. The USC wide receiver core going up against an Arizona secondary getting gashed week after week.
Yeah. So if you're looking for an antidote for the USC air raid, or air raid as we call it, then this is it. This is the week for it. Arizona is rated as one of the worst pass defenses in the Pac-12. They're tied with UCLA in giving up the most passing yards per game at 320 yards per game. USC has the advantage through the air. That's the thing right there. They have the advantage through the air in this game. They can, they could really, if they wanted to, they could sit there and pass all night. Arizona don't really drop 8 in the coverage like that. I think they play a lot of man from what I saw against Washington last week. Play a lot of man, but as you mentioned, USC has the ability to win every 50-50 ball. And with Slovis back and how the way he looked against Notre Dame, he can only get better. And for Arizona's defense, that's trouble. That's real trouble, especially if Slovis found his groove against Notre Dame and playing the way he did.
Now, Matt, on the flip side, Arizona was in the game against Washington for about a half. The Huskies dominated the second half. You mentioned it before we started to record in regards to Khalil Tate having his issues against the Huskies defense once they started to kick in. I've seen USC play, let's see, the BYU game, the Utah game, the Fresno State game to a certain extent. Didn't get to see Notre Dame, surprisingly, with all the big games going on, but need to get back and watch the condensed version on Notre Dame. But it would seem to me, based on what I saw of USC's front against some of the better teams on their schedule, that they could really make life miserable on Khalil Tate, and they seem to have a pretty good advantage on that side of the ball as well, at least up front.
Yeah, so the thing with USC and mobile quarterbacks this year is that USC's had an issue covering mobile quarterbacks, and this isn't a new thing this year. It's been years. Even when Pete Carroll was coaching USC, USC has always had issues against mobile quarterbacks. The thing with Khalil Tate, and I've seen a lot of people talk about it, is that USC could have a very hard time, and it's probably not the best thing to think about what Khalil Tate could do on the ground against this USC defense. But something that a lot of people don't realize, is that Clancy Pendergast, the last 3 years against Khalil Tate, has really done an outstanding job containing Tate. He's put pressure on Tate. He's boxed him in. He's forced Khalil Tate to beat USC with his arm, which he really hasn't done. He has not shown that he can beat USC with his arm alone, and that plays into USC's hand. The thing we saw against Washington with Khalil Tate was that Washington brought a lot of pressure, and you saw Khalil Tate try to scramble out and try to make plays, and he looked like a deer in headlights. I think somebody from FS1, one of the broadcasters from FS1 said it perfectly. Khalil Tate looked like a deer in headlights when he sees pressure. And I think that's what Clancy Pendergast is going to do this game, is to bring a lot of pressure on Khalil Tate and force him to make quicker decisions instead of forcing him to sit back and then to make plays with his feet. It's kind of similar to what they did against Notre Dame and with Ian Book in the first quarter, where they brought pressure to Ian Book, and Ian Book got so flustered that he was looking to see where every USC defender was so he could get rid of the ball or try to make a play.
Khalil Tate had a huge day against Colorado in a 35-30 win, 31 of 41, 404 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. Against Washington, as you mentioned, 13 of 25 for $184. He threw a touchdown, threw a pick. Can't really look at his rushing yardage, although they bottled him up because they sacked him so many times. He had negative 28 yards rushing. And of course, we know that he didn't have negative 28 rushing, but his long run against Washington was 11 yards. So he made no impact for the most part running the football. They sacked him a ton of times. And they made life miserable after Arizona scored 17 points in the second quarter to take a 17-13 halftime lead. There was no comparison between the two teams in the second half of that game at Arizona. Now the Wildcats have to go on the road where they're not nearly as good a team as they are at home and take on USC, where the ESPN Power Index is giving USC about an 82% chance of winning, and that would seem to line up with the way I look at things right here. So what are the concerns? Because obviously it's not locked in stone that you're going to win this one. It's a pretty capable Arizona team, although you're a substantial favorite.
I think some of the concerns lie on defense, and it comes with the how the way USC looked with the misdirection plays and the running game. Yeah, USC played a legitimate top 10 team who has a legitimate offense. And I think with that, a lot of people are concerned what Arizona could do with Khalil Tate and with JJ Taylor. I think Arizona is not as they're not as talented as Notre Dame is. Their offensive line, as you mentioned, gave up a ton of sacks. JJ Taylor, as shifty as he is and as much as he can spin his way out of trouble, I don't think USC has a hard time against the run. I do think, however, you could see Arizona go with a lot of misdirections. Arizona could go with a lot of plays going sideline to sideline where USC has shown that they've been weak at. And if that happens, then the game could turn into a shootout. But I think that's where the real concern lies. I don't see where USC has issues offensively, especially against the Arizona pass defense. That's one of the worst in the conference.
Okay, jump on over to Conquest Chronicles. You can catch Matt's work and the rest of the staff there in covering USC football as the Trojans prepare for the stretch drive of the Pac-12 South Division Championship run, with Arizona coming to the Coliseum this Saturday. And, of course, right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, Week 8 matchups and previews all over the place, including, of course, this one. Matt, we appreciate you stopping by, man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.